So we're going to have a look here at how food chains work and their importance in the slowing down of the energy transfer through the biological systems on Earth, and how they help recycle important matter and nutrients through the interactions of that food chain. So a food chain basically just describes what eats what within a particular ecosystem. So when we're looking at an ecosystem, we're looking at a particular defined system like a pond or a river or a lake or a meadow, and within that particular system, what are the different animals and plants that are in it and what eats what. And we organize the food chain in, with the producers along the bottom. So the producers are mostly the plants and algae within that system, and they're called producers because they can produce their own food. So through the process of photosynthesis, they create their own foods and use that to create their own bodies and create the tissues of the plants and the algae. And they in turn then become food for other animals that can't do that. So it's only these producers that can photosynthesize. The rest of all the animals that you get in any ecosystem are called consumers because they need to eat something else to get that food to make their own tissues in their body. So when you look at the consumers, there's primary consumers, which are herbivores. So they're the things that directly eat the plants. And then there's secondary consumers, which are smaller carnivores or omnivores that are eating the herbivores or the plants as well. And then the tertiary consumers, which are the top carnivores within that system, which are right at the top of the food chain and normally the biggest things in those ecosystems other than trees, and eating all the other animals that are in it. So if we create this food chain for an aquatic system, so we've got, for the producers, we've got algae, water plants, and the kind of the edge semi-aquatic plants. What you do with a food chain is show where the energy goes. So by drawing an arrow, you're showing where the energy goes in this food chain, and the arrow indicates what is eating what. So if we've got if we've got a snail eating algae, we show that the energy from the algae is going to the snail when the snail eats the algae. And we've got algae eating fish, and we've got insects that are probably eating algae too, and the small insects will also be eating the water plants and the edge plants. The snails will be eating the water plants, and the algae eating fish will probably be eating the water plants as well. So we've only got a small representation here of all the different animals in this ecosystem, but when you map this out for all of the animals in an ecosystem, you've got arrows going everywhere. But the overall structuring of it is with the producers and then the primary, secondary and tertiary consumers. And then you've got arrows just going everywhere to showing what's eating what. But if we take it one step up, we've got small fish that are eating the snails and the small insects. And we've got frogs eating the small insects, and we've got predatory insects eating the small insects. And then we've got the big fish that are eating the small fish, frogs, the insects, and we've got the herons eating the frogs and the small fish. So this is, a simplistic version, just showing where the energy is going in this food web. The other interesting thing with the food web is the amount of biomass that each level can produce, because as you go up each level of the food chain, you can support fewer numbers and fewer diversity of individuals every step up you go. So you represent this with an ecological food pyramid. We'll just call it a food pyramid. And on the base of the pyramid is the producers, and the pyramid is kind of representing the biomass and the diversity of each level as you go up. So you've got the producers, And then the rest of it's the consumers. So you've got the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary. And each level you go up the food chain, only 10% of the energy from the level below actually goes into the next level above. So you get 10% of the energy available in these producers and the tissues of all the plants and the algae that are in the system are actually available to the snails, small insects, and algae-eating fish. The other 90% of that energy is lost as heat into the atmosphere. Now, this actually is quite an important point because there's a fundamental law of physics called entropy, where any system, where you look at the energy going into that system and the energy going out of that system, the total energy is always the same, but the energy going out of it is in a more disorganized, less useful state. So when you've got energy going into a food chain and being incorporated into the production of biological molecules by the plants, and as you go each level up the food chain, 90% of the energy is lost each time as heat. And by doing that, it's obeying the law of entropy that this system overall is becoming less organized because at each stage, 90% of energy is being lost as heat. So when you look at a biological system, at first it seems to contradict the law of entropy, because you see in nature how all these amazing complex biological systems are organized, and yet behind that there's this unyielding kind of physics law that system that apparently looks amazingly well organized has to be trending towards a more disorganized state. So by losing 90% of energy as heat and using 10% to help organize this biological complexity, it's still obeying the law of entropy. It's still becoming more disorganized, but it's borrowing that 10% of energy to create the structure within the system. So it's and the more complex and the more diverse this biological system is, the more able it is to produce a more diverse range of products, and the more stable it becomes. So it's the way that life has kind of evolved to gain a foothold on Earth and to create the amazing complexity that there is on Earth, is by making the best use of this 10% of energy it can do to create this biological complexity. So at each level you're getting 10% go to the next level, and 90% lost as heat to obey the law of entropy, but that 10% is used each time to help create more diversity and more complexity within that ecological system, and therefore more stability, more resilience, and more productivity within that ecological system. So it's one of the things that kind of underpin understanding ecology.